Nightfall brings darkness, that's normal. But in some villages, darkness isn't just about the absence of light. It's alive. It watches you, follows you, hides in the quietest corners where no prayers reach and no science dares to explain. In the far corners of rural India, where the internet barely exists and electricity flickers like candlelight, stories are not just told, they are lived. Locals don't speak after sunset, not out of superstition, but out of memory. Memory of what they've seen, heard, and never forgotten. The trees whisper names. The wind carries voices that aren't yours. And somewhere beyond the last paved road lies a world where even the bravest turn back. Today, we're taking you there, to the villages forgotten by maps, but remembered in nightmares. These are not just ghost stories. These are supernatural events rooted in real places, witnessed by real people. And once you hear them, you might not sleep the same way again. Our journey begins in the remote village of Kalapatti, where the modern world's pulse seems to slow, where the hum of electricity is replaced by the hush of ancient soil, and where time appears not to flow, but to pulse in rhythm with the earth itself. Situated miles beyond the furthest paved road, Kalapatti is wrapped in a landscape of dense fields and whispering woods, so isolated that the idea of mobile signal or internet access is almost a legend. When you arrive, you might first notice the absence. No street lamps lining dusty lanes, no neon glow from shops, only the dim flicker of clay lamps placed outside each hut at precisely 8 o'clock every evening. The villagers speak of this ritual without emotion, almost as if it is a mundane chore handed down through generations. It has always been this way, they say. Yet they avoid elaborating as though the lamp is not meant to keep something in, but rather something out, something that slips in if darkness reigns unchecked. As twilight descends, stray dogs retreat into hidden corners, and birds, those who dared linger, fall silent. The air shifts, growing colder, heavier, as though the very sky tightens its grip. With each step deeper into Kalapatti, you feel it, the stillness, the underlying hum of something restless beneath the surface, like suppressed breath held in anticipation. Doors are bolted shut at dusk, but not for protection from theft or wild animals. Rather, it seems a collective understanding. After night arrives, silence maintains its dominion, and in that silence, people behave differently. Children do not play after dark. Adults speak in muted tones or stop altogether. The boundaries between reality and something else begin to blur around the edges. Shadows appear to elongate it, corners seem darker than natural, and the hum of insects grows louder, sharper. As you walk past the earthen walls and thatched roofs, you might notice strange details. Clay lamps placed atop windowsills, not inside. Footprints on the threshold leading into the hut, but none leading out. Unblinking eyes of cows and goats staring at nothing. Incense that burns without flame in front of a small shrine left untouched for months. The village elders claim these are mere echoes of past rituals, lost meanings. But when asked why the same lamp must burn even on nights when rain is coming, or why no visitor ever stays more than a single night, their faces turn pale, and they offer a half smile with a warning. Kalapatti does not keep well-wishers. In the heart of the village stands a banyan tree older than memory, its roots sprawling like serpents across the earth. Beneath it sits a small platform where villagers once gathered to share stories, but now only the elders come with lanterns, speak in barely audible tones, and leave at once when the wind shifts. Some remember a time when the banyan was used for festivals, harvest rituals, weddings, but nowadays no ceremony honors it. Instead, its presence serves as a silent sentinel. Nights in Kalapatti are governed by an unspoken schedule. At precisely 8 p.m., each house lights a clay lamp, one flickering flame casting slow-moving shadows across mud walls. 10 minutes later, an owl hoots once, somewhere in the trees beyond, and a hush sweeps through the lanes. 15 minutes later, no voices, only the sound of distant crickets chirping in rhythmic patterns that seem to synchronize across multiple syllables like a strange choir. At 20 minutes after 8, the wind rises from the west and carries a faint hum, like a lullaby, one that no mother sings. On moonless nights, locals say, you can hear that hum become words, names whispered in languages you don't understand. You may find clay figures, tiny statuettes by doorsteps, each one facing outward toward the forest. When asked why, villagers say, to remind the forest that someone is watching back. They don't claim the forest is haunted, but the forest takes notice. Youngsters speak of the forest edge as a threshold where maps end and stories begin. The moment you step beyond that line, the air changes, the darkness presses closer, and something churns behind the darkness, watching. A few brave, or perhaps curious outsiders have tried to walk the forest boundary at midnight. Some returned pale-faced. None spoke clearly of what they saw. One arrived drenched in sweat and muttering. It looked back and refused to elaborate. Another left his camera behind on the path. When the villagers opened it, the last photo was a dense tangle of branches under moonlight, but the image was hazy, motion blurred, and at its center, a pair of glowing, expressionless eyes. The camera was kept in the village skull shrine, not returned. Some said it belonged to the forest now. Yet Kalapatti's isolation is not born of geography alone. It is sustained by something older, collective memory. Children grow up learning which paths to avoid once darkness falls, which lamp to light and where to place it, and never to look into reflective surfaces after sunset. Mirrors are taboo. Glass windows are covered with cloth. Dozens of generations have preserved these customs. When modern travelers arrive curious about folklore, they are met with polite hospitality, but only for the day. Lodging is offered inside, but visitors are always moved to the outermost hut, furthest from the center. They are encouraged to leave at first light. No one pushes or forces. It's as if the village itself breathes a subtle insistence that you do not stay. Though the clay lamps expend fuel and flicker in the breeze, their light never warms. Instead, they expose the way shadows creep along walls when they shouldn't. And somewhere in that interplay of flame and darkness, the villagers believe there exists a boundary that must never break between the known world and something older, wilder. At this time each night, the distant church bell or temple bell rings somewhere down the empty lane. Though the temple itself has been unused for decades, its priests long gone. The sound floats through the air as if summoned by unseen hands. A wind chime might tinkle somewhere behind you, though no one hung it there. If you stop to listen, the silence stretches, not peaceful but expectant. In that expectancy, your skin prickles, your breathing slows, and you realize the hush after 8 is not peaceful, it is watchful. Something waits. Visitors recount feeling watched while they sleep, even when there is no one in the hut with them. Some have said shadows drift across the ceiling, separate from their body's movements. Others whisper of a dreamlike presence drawing near, a whisper that says your name, though it is foreign to you, yet eerily accurate. You wake to the flicker of your clay lamp extinguished, though the match you struck hours ago is still burning calmly beside it. And when you open your eyes, you feel something else in the room, something that leans closer, breathes out words that dissolve before you understand them. The next morning, the villagers are quiet. They don't ask what you heard, or even if you slept at all. Lamps are relit, footprints erased, and no one mentions the nighttime visitor. Because in Kalapatti, the night does not end. It simply retreats, waiting for its next chance to return. And somewhere in the deep stillness of fields and huts, you begin to wonder, do we visit the village, or does the village visit us? And who really guides whom once the lights go out and the lamps flicker on? The forest that borders Kalapatti doesn't begin with trees. It begins with stillness, a kind of silence that weighs more than sound, as if nature itself pauses, waiting for something to pass. Locals call it Chandraket, though they rarely say the name aloud. It rests on the edge of the village like an ancient secret, with trees that lean as though listening and shadows that stretch too far. Step past the stone boundary where the last hut ends and the soil changes color, and you're no longer in the world you knew. The trees grow denser, twisted with age and memory, their bark carved with symbols no one claims to understand. The deeper you go, the more the forest shifts. Paths you just walked vanish, moss grows in seconds, and the light turns strange, dimming even at noon as though the sky itself refuses to witness what lies beneath the leaves. People who go in don't always come out, and those who do often leave parts of themselves behind, names, memories, even shadows that return days later, crawling along the edges of the village. Elders speak of the forest as a mirror that reflects what you hide, a place that listens when you lie and learns from every footstep. They say it holds the echoes of every voice it's ever heard, and sometimes, if you're quiet enough, it speaks them back to you, not all at once, but pieced together like a broken lullaby sung in reverse. A traveling musician once entered the woods to find inspiration and came back with songs no human throat should know, melodies that caused animals to freeze and infants to cry in silence. He burned his instrument and vanished 2 nights later. Some say the forest called him back to finish what he started. Others claim he never really left, and that what returned was just a reflection, an echo, mimicking his habits, but with none of the warmth in his eyes. Children are told not to follow butterflies into the forest, not because they're dangerous, but because they aren't butterflies. A boy once chased a blue-winged one past the first row of trees and was found standing still hours later, eyes wide, hands cupped around nothing. When asked what he was holding, he replied, "It wanted me to remember." He never spoke again. His drawings covered his walls, trees with eyes, rivers flowing backward, and a face with no mouth, only a finger pressed to where lips should be. The deeper you go, the more the rules fray. Time bends. You may hear your name from behind in your own voice. You may find your footprints beside you instead of behind. Stories speak of people entering in pairs and returning in threes, of people who return looking the same, sounding the same, but with something missing like the way they blink or breathe or remember their mother's name. Some villagers believe the forest is not haunted but alive, a thing that learns, a thing that adapts. It doesn't scare with sudden sounds or glowing eyes. It studies you. It watches what you fear and offers it gently, like a gift. One man entered in broad daylight whistling, claiming the stories were nonsense. He returned 30 minutes later, barefoot, covered in mud, and silent. When he finally spoke, his words came in reverse and his eyes wouldn't close. He was taken to the healer, who tried chants and herbs, but nothing helped. 3 days later, he walked back into the forest without a sound. He was smiling. They never saw him again. Some say he's still there, smiling in the trees. The forest mimics things, not with precision, but with something worse, familiarity. A child's voice calling for help, a but just a little too flat. A loved one's laugh echoing from above where no branches move. A second shadow beside yours when no one is there. One elder confessed before passing away that long ago he had led a group into Chandrakot to map its interior. They used chalk to mark trees. But after hours of walking, they found the same tree marked differently, as if someone else was marking it too. From inside, the others turned on each other, convinced of betrayal. Only he returned, and only because he stopped walking. He stood still for 6 hours. When he finally moved again, the path was clear. He told no one what he heard in those hours, except for this: it doesn't want you to leave, but it also doesn't want to keep you. It wants you to become part of it. That's why no one cuts the trees, not even when wood is scarce. An old carpenter once used a branch from near the edge to carve a walking stick. The next day, he found 3 identical copies of it leaning outside his door, each slightly taller, each carved with deeper grooves. When he burned them all, his house filled with smoke but no flame. He moved away that week and never spoke of it again. Some say he died of fear. Others say the stick he took wasn't finished yet. People leave offerings at the boundary: rice, salt, copper coins, not for spirits, for respect, for boundaries, and above all for forgetting, because the longer you look into the forest, the more you remember things that didn't happen to you. Things with no words, no images, just feelings, wet, cold, endless, and watching. Travelers sometimes say they dreamed of Chandrakot before ever hearing its name. They describe the same trees, the same curve in the path, the same clearing where the sky looks just a little too far away. And in those dreams, something always stands at the center, waiting. Always waiting, but never moving. They say if you stand in that central clearing too long, you stop hearing your own thoughts and start hearing someone else's. Not words exactly, just presence, intention, the awareness of being watched by something that doesn't blink, doesn't breathe, but knows you in a way even your own blood doesn't. Some call it an ancient god. Others say it's a wound in the world that never closed. A traveler once called it a mirror with a heartbeat, a place that reflects not your image, but your consequence. There are no paths that lead to it. Only the forest decides who gets there, and no one ever arrives twice. That's why the villagers don't speak its name. That's why no one builds facing east. That's why every door in Kalapatti creaks open toward the road, not the woods. They say the road is safer. They say if you hear your name whispered from the trees, you must never turn around, no matter who it sounds like. They say to light a lamp and walk backward until the whisper fades. They say the forest never lies, but it also never forgets. Chandrakot is not cursed. It is complete. It needs nothing, and that is what makes it terrifying, because to step into it is not to risk death. It is to risk never being missed, to be erased so cleanly from memory that only the forest remembers you were ever real. And sometimes, late at night, when the village is asleep and the wind carries a sound like humming, some believe that's the forest remembering someone it used to know. They say every village has its secrets, but Kalapatti's was not buried. It was reflected. The mirror ritual, known in whispers as Aina Rat, isn't just a tradition. It's a warning carved into time itself. No one speaks of it casually, and even fewer admit they've seen it happen. It takes place only once a year, on the night when the moon disappears completely and the sky is a vault of black ink. That night, mirrors are not allowed indoors. Every reflective surface is covered with dark cloth, every polished metal hidden or turned to the wall. Oil lamps are lit early and positioned to face outward, toward the forest, not inward toward the home. The village falls into a hush, not just silence, but a deep, pressed quiet, like the world has folded in on itself. The ritual is not performed by priests or holy men, but by chosen villagers whose names are never announced until dusk. These chosen ones walk barefoot toward the edge of Chandrakot, carrying with them only a single object, the ancient mirror. It is no ordinary glass. It is old, blackened around the edges, and oddly cool to the touch no matter the season. Its frame is carved from a wood that does not grow anywhere in the region, and at the top, a small eye is etched, a design that never fades, even as the rest of the mirror weathers. The elders say it was found centuries ago in the hollow of a tree that should not have existed, and since then, it has never left the village. On this night, the mirror is taken into the forest, just beyond the boundary, to a stone slab that always appears the same night, then disappears the next morning. No one dares ask why. The mirror is placed upright on the slab, and then the chosen ones take turns standing before it, one at a time, as the rest of the village watches from a distance, holding their breath. The rule is simple. If your reflection appears, you are safe. If it does not, your name is never spoken again. The elders say the mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't tell the truth either. It reveals something else entirely, something older. One year, a young girl named Vika was chosen. She stood before the mirror for minutes, but saw nothing. No flicker of her image, no shimmer of movement. She smiled as if accepting it and turned away without a word. That night, she went home, brushed her hair, laid down in her bed, and simply never woke up. Her body was warm for days. Her eyes never fully closed. Her reflection never returned to any surface, even after her death. It was as though the forest had taken only the part of her that could be seen. Her mother kept mirrors in every room for years, hoping one day she might appear again in the glass, but they all remained dark when she passed by. eye. Some say the mirror isn't just a tool, it's a doorway, or worse, an invitation. The reflection you see might not be yours, or at least not yours alone. It's what watches from the other side that matters. On one occasion, an outsider, a documentary filmmaker, was granted permission to witness the ritual. He was told not to bring cameras, not to speak, not to blink while standing before the mirror. He obeyed everything except the last. When his turn came, he looked into the glass and blinked twice. When he opened his eyes again, he screamed. Not once, not twice. He screamed until his throat tore. What he saw, he never explained. He lost the ability to look at his own face after that. Even in water, even in a window pane, he would flinch and turn away. Eventually, he went blind by choice. The village never invited an outsider again. The mirror never cracked, never dulled. But over the years, it began showing strange things. Sometimes two faces at once. Sometimes faces of those long dead. Once, during a particularly dry summer, it showed the face of someone who had not yet been born. That child came into the world a year later with the same eyes the mirror had already known. She never cried, never laughed, just stared, always toward the forest, as if remembering something she hadn't lived yet. The villagers stopped asking questions after that. They obeyed the ritual, performed it with the reverence of those who fear not punishment, but remembrance. Because the mirror doesn't curse, it remembers. It remembers who looks into it and what they bring with them. And if it doesn't like what it sees, it keeps a piece of you for itself. The chosen ones often change. Even if their reflection returns, their shadows move slower, their voices soften. One man aged 20 years in a single week. Another forgot the name of every woman he'd ever loved. A third lost his ability to sleep entirely, his eyes remaining open for 6 months until they turned milk white. He wandered into the woods and was never seen again, but his reflection remained in his house, glimpsed in the glass of a shut cupboard, or in the water that wouldn't ripple in his absence. The elders say the mirror isn't evil, it's simply ancient.
It comes from a time when the world was more honest.
Lies left stains and thoughts had weight. It shows what is, not what we want to see. But sometimes the truth is worse than any nightmare. One year the ritual was disrupted. A storm came early, wild and sudden, the winds tearing at cloth, the lamps blowing out. One of the chosen, a boy barely 17, panicked and ran, carrying the mirror with him into the woods. They say the storm stopped the moment he crossed the second ring of trees. Silence returned, and so did he. Days later, empty-eyed, whispering words in reverse. He no longer responded to his own name. The mirror was returned, untouched, but its surface had changed, now slightly fogged at the center, like a breath that had never faded. Since that night, the ritual has never been delayed, no matter the rain, no matter the illness, because no one dares repeat what happened. The forest remembers, the mirror remembers. Even now, every house in Kalapatti keeps its mirrors covered from dusk until dawn, not just on ritual night, but always. Guests who forget to do so often wake up with odd dreams and the lingering sensation that they've been watched from inside the glass. And when villagers die, their bodies are shown to no mirrors. It is believed the soul can be stolen back by the mirror if it sees its host again too soon. Some say that's how it feeds, but others believe it's mercy, that the mirror only takes what the world no longer protects. And so each year, when the moon disappears and the air turns colder than it should, Kalapatti prepares. The cloths are hung, the lamps are lit, names are drawn. And as the chosen walk barefoot toward the edge of the forest, holding the weight of memory and judgment in their hands, the village falls into silence. Not out of ritual, but out of fear. Because in Kalapatti, no one fears ghosts or monsters or curses. They fear their own reflection. They know if it does not look back, then something else will. Kalapatti had always kept to itself, not because of pride or fear of the outside world, but because it knew something the rest of the world had forgotten: how to survive by staying silent. Silence wasn't emptiness here, it was armor. Over generations, villagers had learned that some things must not be acknowledged to be avoided, and at the heart of all their unspoken rules was something that had no name but many effects. It was called the final whisper, not officially, not in writing, not even aloud, but in the way eyes met with quiet panic when someone heard their name spoken after midnight. It always came alone, not during stormy nights or howling winds, but in perfect calm. You'd be lying in bed, half asleep, when you'd hear your name in the voice of someone you love, your mother, your child, someone long gone. The voice didn't beg, it didn't plead, it simply called, softly, with familiarity that scraped against the bone. The worst part wasn't hearing it, it was the part of you that wanted to respond, because the whisper didn't command you, it invited you, and that was far more dangerous. The elders said that once you answered, even just in your mind, something came closer. Not instantly, not with a scream or a bang, just closer, as if your answer pulled a string, and the thing at the other end began walking towards you, slowly, night by night, until it was there. People who answered didn't vanish right away, they changed. They moved slower, as if dragging weight behind their limbs. They forgot faces. They stopped casting shadows. Some began whispering in their sleep, not words, but rhythms, like breath caught in reverse. Some drew circles. Others stopped drawing entirely, sitting still for hours, smiling at corners of the room no one else looked at. And then one morning, they would be gone, not taken violently, just missing. The bed undisturbed, the floor clean, no door open, no windows broken. spoken, just an absence that rang louder than presence. Their name was never spoken again, because the say was to call them back, and no one wanted that. Some say the whisper comes from the forest. Others say it lives beneath the village itself, under the cracked earth and the water that tastes faintly of copper during winter. A few believe it's not a thing at all, but a memory, something ancient that was once forgotten and now wants to be known again. But no one debates what it does, because everyone in Kalapatti knows someone who answered, and everyone has learned to keep their windows shut and their ears covered on windless nights. Lamps are not just for light, they're for anchoring. It's said that the whisper cannot enter a room with flame, but even then, some claim they've seen lamps dim without reason when the voice calls. A little girl once asked her grandmother why the villagers wear silver thread in their hair at night. The old woman replied, "So it doesn't find the part of us that listens." That child later heard her dead father call her from beneath her bed. She covered her ears and chanted her name backward until sunrise. She lived, but her voice grew quieter each year, as if she gave part of it away just to survive. Others weren't as lucky. A man heard his name called 3 nights in a row. On the 4th, he dug a hole behind his house. When his wife found it, he was sitting inside it, smiling at the dirt, saying, "It sounds like rain under here." They buried him next to that spot months later after he walked into the forest and didn't return. The ground above that hole never grew grass again. There are places in Kalapatti where sound doesn't behave. Whispers echo louder than shouts. Laughter turns into coughing. Mirrors rattle when no one touches them. And the wind always moves away from the village on certain nights like it's fleeing. One visitor, an anthropologist, called it communal hallucination until he spent one night alone in the northernmost hut. He left at dawn without his luggage or his boots. He never published a word about what he saw. But the next guest, who stayed in the same hut, claimed they heard footsteps on the ceiling all night, barefoot, heavy, deliberate. The villagers no longer ask where it comes from. The question itself seems to summon attention. Now they simply follow the rules. Never respond to a voice you cannot see. Never say your name aloud after dark. Never keep mirrors uncovered after dusk. And most importantly, never look toward the forest if the night is completely silent. Because silence is not peace in Kalapatti. Silence is presence. It's when everything else hides. The trees don't move. The dogs don't bark. And if you listen closely, you hear breathing, but not your own. Some say the final whisper is not a curse, but a consequence. That long ago, someone from Kalapatti promised something to the dark and broke that promise. And now the darkness sends reminders, gentle ones at first, soft voices, loving tones, until they're answered. And once they are, the promise must be paid. A man once wrote his name on every wall in his house, believing if he claimed it, protected it, the voice couldn't take it. On the 7th night, every name he'd written was replaced with a single word: remember. No one saw him again, but travelers claim that if you walk alone near the riverbank on windless nights, you can hear someone humming. Not a tune, just the sound of someone remembering a name they no longer want to forget. And when the whisper comes, it doesn't come with malice or rage. It comes like a mother waking you gently, like a lover's voice beside your ear, like something you missed but didn't know you were missing. And that's why it wins, because it never knocks, it invites, it never screams, it sighs. And if you listen long enough, if you let yourself believe it, even for a second, you'll find yourself walking toward it, smiling, remembering, leaving no trace. In Kalapatti, people don't fear death. They fear being remembered by something that never lets go. And so, when the wind is still and the night is too quiet, everyone locks their doors, lowers their flames, and speaks of anything except themselves. Because the final whisper never forgets the names it learns, and it only ever calls once.